For the purpose of this story, I will refer to myself as Nolan. This whole situation started the way most gym friendships start. You see the exact same person day in and day out. At first, you just ignore each other and focus entirely on your own workout. But after a few weeks of this, you stop pretending that you do not recognize them. You start with a simple, casual nod of the head when you pass by. Then, eventually, you say what is up when you see them by the dumbbell rack. It is a very normal, everyday thing that happens to almost everyone who exercises regularly. I was going to my local gym almost every single day, right after I finished my shift at work. It was usually around the exact same time, and I followed the same routine. It was the only part of my daily life that felt completely predictable and under my control. One of the regulars at this gym was a guy named Josh. He had that specific look about him, where you could tell he wanted everyone to see him as a serious, dedicated lifter. He was always wearing some kind of tightly fitted athletic shirt, carrying a metal shaker bottle, and walking around with an incredibly large black duffel bag. He was at the gym so often that it honestly felt like he lived there. At first, our interactions were just the small stuff. A quick nod when we passed each other or a brief wave. It felt pretty normal. You see the same faces long enough in a shared space, and it starts to feel a bit rude if you do not acknowledge them. Josh seemed friendly enough at the beginning of our interactions. He would smile and do that quick chin-up gesture like we were already good friends, even though we had never actually spoken a single word to each other. One afternoon, I was setting up to do some bench presses. Josh was already working out on the bench in the very next rack over. He looked over at me, caught my eye, and asked if I could give him a quick spot. That was the moment when our dynamic actually turned into something more. I said sure, no problem. I walked over and stood behind his bench while he unracked the heavy barbell. I have to admit, he was a pretty strong guy. He did a few clean reps, but he started to struggle on the very last one. I placed my hands under the bar and helped guide it safely back onto the pegs. He sat up, wiped his forehead, and then he just started talking to me. It felt like he had been waiting for this exact moment to strike up a conversation. He asked me how long I had been lifting, what my daily workout split looked like, and some other basic gym talk. I answered him and told him my routine, and then he went on to explain his own in great detail. He talked incredibly fast, and I could tell right away that he was a very high-energy person. He asked me where I was originally from, what I did for a living, and if I lived anywhere close to the gym. I kept my answers very basic and general. I definitely did not give him my exact address or anything like that, just the general neighborhood. He smiled wide and said he lived not very far from me at all. He laughed out loud, like that was some kind of proof that we were destined to be great friends. Before I could even walk back over to my own bench to finish my sets, he pulled out his phone and asked if I had Instagram. He held the screen out to me in a very casual, non-threatening way. So I figured why not, and I followed him back. It did not seem like a big deal at the time. People exchange social media accounts all the time now. It is basically the modern version of swapping phone numbers. For the next couple of weeks, things went back to a similar routine, but with a slight difference. Whenever Josh was at the gym at the same time as me, he would immediately walk over to say what is up. He would ask me what muscle group I was training that day. Then he would start commenting on the exercises I was doing, offering tips and advice like he was my personal coach, even though I had never once asked for his input. It was not exactly offensive, but it was definitely a little much. I just figured he was one of those overly social guys who treated the local gym like a community center. He started sending me direct messages on Instagram pretty frequently. Mostly, they were just gym memes, silly videos of people failing their lifts, or dramatic edits of bodybuilders with loud music playing in the background. I would usually just react to the messages with a simple laughing emoji and keep moving on with my day. I did not want to be rude or hurt his feelings. He really just seemed like a guy who wanted a gym buddy. Then, out of nowhere, he messaged me one day, saying there was a popular local festival happening over the weekend, and suggested that we should go together. I did not even know the festival was happening. I looked it up online, and saw it was just one of those typical town festivals, with food trucks, cheap drinks, random craft vendors, and live music. The crowd was usually half families and half people who were just there to get a little buzzed in the middle of the afternoon. I hesitated for a bit, but then I typed back and said sure. It sounded like something fun to do on a Saturday, and I figured it would be a quick, easy hangout. If things got awkward or boring, I could easily make an excuse and leave early. When the day of the festival finally arrived, I met up with him there in the middle of the afternoon. The very first thing I noticed was how incredibly different he seemed outside of the gym environment. At the gym, he had a very controlled, focused kind of energy, but out here in public, it was like he had absolutely no volume knob. He was extremely loud from the very moment I walked up to him. He came towards me grinning way too hard, slapped me firmly on the shoulder, and started talking to me like we were old childhood friends reuniting after years of being apart. Then he started doing these really bizarre voices. They sounded like cartoon characters. Sometimes they were high-pitched and nasally, and then suddenly he would switch to a deep, scratchy growl. He would say completely normal, mundane sentences, but he would deliver them in a voice that sounded like he was doing an impression of someone else. It did not fit the situation at all. It was not like we were actively telling jokes, and he was just doing characters for a punchline. He just kept switching his voice back and forth for no apparent reason, like he literally could not help himself. At first, I forced a laugh because it completely caught me off guard. It was so incredibly random that it was almost funny. But then, it just kept going and going. We ended up getting some drinks from one of the booths and started walking around the festival grounds. It felt like the moment the alcohol hit his system, a switch flipped inside of him. His jokes and comments started getting much more inappropriate. They were not clever or funny. They were just aimed at shock value. He would point at random strangers walking past us and make loud comments that you absolutely should not say out loud in public, especially not around young families with kids. He kept trying his best to make me laugh by saying offensive things that would easily get him punched if the wrong person happened to overhear them. I found myself doing that tight, uncomfortable smile, chuckling a little bit just to keep the peace, but also constantly looking around us to see if anyone was staring at us. He did not seem to care about the surrounding people at all. In fact, he would look directly at people while saying these things, almost like he was actively daring them to react to him. A couple of times, I told him to chill out and calm down. Whenever I said that, he would just laugh and slip into another strange voice. It was a creepy, quiet whisper, and he would say my name over and over again, Nolan. He would say it in this fake, spooky tone of voice. He did it multiple times throughout the afternoon. It was really weird how much he enjoyed saying my name. Still, the festival was very busy and loud, and I tried to convince myself that he was just socially awkward and trying way too hard to be funny. Some people just lose their filter completely once they start drinking. I did not want to judge him too harshly based on just one afternoon hangout. We ended up staying there for about 2 hours before I told him I had to head home. I drove away thinking he was definitely a strange guy, but probably completely harmless. After that weekend, he started messaging me even more than before. His Instagram direct messages were no longer just random gym memes. Instead, they became constant, daily check-ins. He would ask me what I was doing at that exact moment, ask if I was going to be at the gym later, and constantly ask if I wanted to link up again. At first I would politely reply to him, but then I started to slow down my responses significantly. I am simply not the type of person who wants to be texting all day long with a guy I barely even know. He messaged me again a week later, asking if I wanted to go out to a bar downtown on Friday night. He mentioned that he had already invited 2 girls to meet up with us there. That detail made the invitation feel a lot more normal and safe. I figured it would be a regular group hangout, not just the 2 of us, so I agreed to go. We met up at the bar that Friday night. Josh was already there when I walked in, and I could tell immediately that he was already buzzed. He had that half-present, glassy look in his eyes, and he was acting with an extra, aggressive level of confidence. We ordered a round of drinks and sat down at a table. 10 minutes passed, then 20 minutes, and absolutely no one else showed up. I finally asked him about the 2 girls he had mentioned, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said they had bailed on us. He said it so casually, like it was no big deal and happened all the time. But the thing was, he had hyped this night up like it was almost a double date. I got this sinking feeling in my stomach that he had lied to me about the girls being there just to trick me into showing up. That thought felt very unsettling, and it stayed with me for the rest of the night. Then, the weird voices started up again, and this time they were much worse than before. He was not just doing cartoon voices anymore. He started making these creepy, highly exaggerated sounds. He would fake laugh loudly, then fake cry, and then suddenly switch into an incredibly deep voice that sounded like a villain from a movie. He would try to weave these strange sounds and voices into the actual conversation we were having. But it was just so bizarre. He was doing all of this right at our table, while the people sitting around us were just trying to have normal, quiet conversations. I watched a couple sitting at the bar look over at our table and smirk. It was not because they thought he was funny, but because it was so incredibly awkward. They looked like they were watching someone make a complete fool of themselves. Josh seemed to notice their attention, and instead of toning it down, he leaned into it even more. He got significantly louder. He started telling these jokes that did not even make any logical sense, and then he would laugh at his own jokes way too hard. Every single time I tried to steer the conversation back to a normal topic, he would interrupt me with another strange voice, and then he would start saying my name again. Nolan. Listen to me, Nolan. It felt like he could not carry on a conversation without constantly anchoring me to him by using my name. I felt so incredibly embarrassed just sitting there with him. It was not even that I cared so much about what the strangers in the bar thought of me, though I did hate feeling like he was making me look like a weirdo by association. It was more that his entire energy was so completely off that it made me feel trapped. People were staring, and the bartender was looking over at us with an annoyed expression, like she was seriously considering kicking him out for being too drunk and disruptive. But Josh just kept on drinking. He ordered a round of shots and tried to force me to do one with him. I firmly told him no, and he reacted like I had just betrayed him. He made a loud joke about me being boring, and then he did a whining voice like a crying baby. I forced a quick laugh, but inside, I wanted nothing more than to get out of there immediately. I pulled out my phone, looked at the screen, and made the decision that I was leaving. I told him that I had to go right away, because I needed to help my brother with an emergency. It was the very first excuse that popped into my head. Josh just stared at me for a long second without saying anything. His face completely changed, and he looked genuinely annoyed and angry, like I had just personally ruined his entire night. He asked me why I could not just stay and have a few more drinks. I repeated that I really had to go. He muttered something angry under his breath, and then he did that fake laugh again, but this time it sounded sharp and hostile. I stood up from the table, told him I would see him around the gym, and walked out. He did not even bother to say goodbye to me. People watched me walk out the door, and I knew it was because we had been such a scene in there because of his bizarre behavior. On the drive home, I felt this massive wave of relief wash over me. It felt like I had been holding my breath for an entire hour. I told myself right then and there that I was done. I was never going to hang out with him outside of the gym ever again. Having a casual gym acquaintance is one thing, but this was something completely different and uncomfortable. The very next time I went to the gym to work out, I saw his car in the parking lot. I felt a pit form in my stomach. When I walked inside, I actively tried to avoid making any eye contact with him. I stayed on the complete opposite side of the gym, hoping and praying that he would not notice me. But of course he did. I was standing near the dumbbell rack, re-racking some weights after a set, when I suddenly heard his voice right behind me. "What is up?" He said it like absolutely nothing had happened at the bar. He was being overly friendly again, acting like that incredibly awkward night did not even exist. He asked me why I had left the bar so early. I just shrugged my shoulders and repeated that I had to go help my brother. He asked if my brother was doing okay, and I just said yeah, he is fine. Then, right on cue, he started talking about us going out to another bar again, like he was already planning our next weekend hangout. I kept all of my answers as short and blunt as possible. I told him that I had a lot of things going on in my life right now and did not have much free time. but he simply did not take the hint. He stayed standing right next to me, talking non-stop while I tried my best to move through my workout. He literally followed me from one workout station to another, like he was glued to my side. Every time I tried to politely end the conversation and move away, he would immediately start a new topic. It honestly felt like he had decided in his mind that I was his chosen person now, and he had no intention of letting go. After that day, I started drastically changing the times I went to the gym. I would go much earlier in the morning or much later at night, just to avoid running into him. Sometimes this strategy worked, and sometimes it did not. Whenever I managed to go and not see him, I felt so much better. But then, the messages on Instagram started coming in even more frequently than before. If I did not open his message right away, he would send another one. If I left his message on read, he would send follow-up texts asking if I was good or if I was mad at him. Eventually, I stopped opening my Instagram direct messages entirely. I absolutely hated the feeling of seeing his name pop up on my lock screen. It gave me a physical knot in my stomach every single time. I hoped that if I just ignored him long enough, he would finally get bored and move on to someone else. Then one night, I was lying in my bed trying to fall asleep. It was a very hot summer night, so I had my bedroom window cracked open a few inches to let some fresh air in. My bedroom is located on the first floor of the house, and the window faces directly into the dark backyard. Suddenly I heard something outside. It was a very low, drawn-out voice, like someone who was trying to sound intentionally spooky on purpose. The voice said my name, Nolan. It was not incredibly loud, but it was right outside my window. It was so close that it felt like the person was standing directly under the window frame. Then, right after the voice stopped, there was nothing but the sound of the wind blowing through the trees, making the sudden silence feel even more unsettling. I sat up quickly in my bed, straining my ears to listen as hard as I could, but I did not hear another sound. I got out of bed, crept over to the window, and carefully peered through the small gaps in the blinds. I could not see anyone out there in the dark, but I could swear I felt a physical presence lurking in the shadows. I cannot explain how, but I just knew someone was there. In a low whisper, I asked through the screen if it was Josh. I did not mean to say his name out loud, but it just slipped out because that was exactly who the voice had sounded like. When there was no answer from the darkness, I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone off the nightstand. My very first thought was, how would he even know where I lived? I had never once told him my address, and I had never posted my location on social media. I went onto Instagram and sent him a direct message. I asked him flat out if he was standing outside of my house. I stared at the screen after I sent the message, feeling incredibly stupid for even asking, but I desperately needed to know the truth. The message showed as read just a few minutes later. That made me feel even worse. He saw the message and chose not to answer me right away. I watched the minutes tick by on my phone, and they felt like agonizing hours. Finally, he replied with just a single word, no. That was it. It felt incredibly fishy to me. If someone asked me if I was lurking outside their house, I would at the very least ask them why they were asking such a crazy question, or express some kind of confusion. But he did not do any of that. I chose not to respond to him. I put my phone down on my nightstand and tried my best to just forget about it and go to sleep. The very next day he messaged me again. He asked me why I was being so cold and distant towards him lately. I did not answer the message. I did not want to engage in a conversation with him, and I certainly did not want to give him anything else to latch onto. But then that night, I heard the voice again. This time it was not directly outside my bedroom window. It sounded like it was coming from further back in my backyard, near the back fence line. It was the exact same intentionally creepy, fake tone of voice. It sounded exactly like Josh doing one of his weird character impressions. He said my name again, slow and very stretched out, Nolan. And then, it stopped abruptly, almost as if he had noticed some kind of movement inside the house. I got up out of bed, walked quickly over to the window, pulled the blinds completely aside, and stared out into the yard. The backyard looked completely empty in the moonlight. I closed the window all the way, locked it tightly, and even though it was incredibly hot in my room, I kept it shut. I turned my bedside fan up to its highest speed so that the loud hum would drown out any other potential sounds coming from outside. Then I picked up my phone and sent Josh another message. This time I did not ask him any questions. I told him very clearly that if he did not leave me alone, and if he ever came near my property again, I was going to contact the police immediately and file for a restraining order. I ended the message by calling him a freak, and then I blocked his account right after sending it. I set my phone down on the table and told myself that was the end of it. I had drawn a very clear line in the sand. Surely he would get scared off by the threat of the police. That is what any normal person would do. But Josh was clearly not a normal person. I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, and I simply could not fall asleep. Even with the fan blowing on full blast, my ears were constantly searching for any tiny sound coming from outside. A part of me felt this awful, anxious curiosity. I felt like if I did not keep checking the window, I was going to be completely blindsided by something. I rolled over in bed, reached out, and carefully lifted one of the blind slats just a tiny bit. Through the small gap, my heart absolutely stopped. I saw a physical figure standing incredibly close to my window. It was a dark shadow, outlined against the faint light of the yard, standing completely still. The figure was so close to the glass that it was blocking the light. I panicked and yelled as loud as I could right at the window, telling him to get the hell away from my house and never come back. The shadow instantly shifted away from the glass and disappeared rapidly into the darkness of the yard. I stood there in my room, shaking uncontrollably, listening intently for the sound of the side gate opening or closing, but there was only dead silence. After that night, I no longer felt safe in my own bedroom. Every single tiny noise outside made me jump, thinking he had returned. I stopped going to that gym entirely. I did not want him to have any way of tracking my daily routine. I ended up signing up at a completely different gym all the way across town, even though it was much more expensive and much further away from my house. I stopped posting anything on my social media accounts for a long time. I kept my bedroom blinds tightly shut at night, and I started checking all the locks on my doors and windows obsessively before bed. 3 weeks went by, and absolutely nothing happened. I slowly started to relax a little bit, thinking the nightmare was finally over. Then, one morning, I walked out of my front door to go to work and noticed that my car was sitting low. My rear passenger tire was completely flat. I crouched down on the driveway to inspect it and saw a deep, clean cut right in the sidewall. He had slashed my tire. I stood up and looked frantically up and down the street, almost expecting to see him standing there in the distance, watching me discover it. I did not try to confront Josh about it. He was already blocked on everything anyway. I knew that confronting him would only feed into whatever sick obsession he had going on. If he was the one who slashed my tire, and I was certain he was, it meant he was still actively watching me. It meant he wanted to provoke a reaction out of me. I refused to give him that satisfaction. I got the flat tire replaced, and that very same afternoon, I went out and bought security cameras. I installed ring cameras all around my house, covering both the front door and the backyard. I also put up bright, motion-activated floodlights in the backyard. I did not like having to spend all that money, but I liked the idea of being completely blind to what was happening outside even less. I kept an extremely low profile after that. I stopped going out late at night. I never took the exact same route home from work 2 days in a row, and I would check my phone app every single time I received a motion notification. The absolute worst part of this entire experience was knowing that a guy I had met in the most normal, mundane place, a guy I had simply tried to be friendly and polite to, had developed such a disturbing and dangerous obsession with me after we hung out only 2 times. Once a person like that decides in their head that you are their friend, or that you owe them some kind of relationship, it is incredibly difficult to get them out of your life. So, my best advice to anyone listening is to be extremely careful about who you let into your life, even in the most normal settings. My name is Louis. I am 22 years old, and I live in a relatively small, quiet town in Kansas. It is generally a very safe place to live. In fact, my family and I have lived here for almost 14 years now. I work as a server at a local Mexican restaurant, and I have been doing that job for about 4 years. It is not a bad gig at all, it keeps me busy. Every single day, I go to the gym to work out with my close friend Colton. Colton is 19 years old. He is your typical country, redneck kind of guy. But he is incredibly chill and a really great friend to have. This whole situation took place last summer. Colton had been dating a girl from the local high school named Addie. She was 17 years old and was a cheerleader. The two of them had met on a dating app and had been dating for about 4 months. Their relationship was toxic, to say the very least. They were constantly getting into huge fights over the smallest, most insignificant things. Addie was extremely possessive. She did not even like the fact that Colton went to the gym with me every day. She wanted him to spend every waking moment with her, and only her. Eventually, Colton found out through some mutual friends that she had been cheating on him with multiple different guys. That was the absolute final straw for him. He officially broke up with her. As you can probably guess, she did not take the breakup well at all. One Tuesday night, Colton and I were at our usual gym working out. We normally head there around 7 in the evening, because Colton gets off work at 6. We were standing near the entrance, drinking our pre-workout, and getting ready to start our session, when the front door opened and a girl walked in. She was wearing a bright red hoodie with the hood pulled up and blue leggings. Right away, I felt like something was off about her. Instead of walking in, looking around, or checking her phone like normal people do, she just stood there by the door for a few seconds, staring directly at Colton and me. Then she slowly started walking towards the women's locker room, but she kept looking back over her shoulder at us the entire way. Colton did not really pay much attention to it, but it definitely rubbed me the wrong way. A few minutes later, while we were working out, we started hearing these strange noises coming from inside the women's locker room. It sounded like a mix of intense crying and loud whispering. The sound was actually loud enough that we could easily hear it right through our headphones. It did not sound like normal, sad crying. It sounded highly unstable, almost like someone was frantically talking to themselves while having a complete mental breakdown. We tried our best to just ignore it and continued with our workout. About 10 minutes later, the girl finally came out of the locker room. Strangely, she was wearing the exact same red hoodie and blue leggings. That was incredibly weird, because usually when someone goes into the locker room, they change into their actual workout clothes. But she had not changed at all. She just walked out into the gym and started wandering around the floor without actually using a single piece of equipment. She kept drifting closer and closer to where Colton and I were working out. She was hovering way too close to whatever machine we were using, just standing there and openly watching us. I looked at Colton and told him that she was making me feel extremely uncomfortable. We grabbed our gear and moved to a machine on the complete opposite side of the gym. A few minutes later, we looked around and realized she was gone. We had not actually seen her walk out the door. She had just vanished. We finished up our workout session around 8:40 in the evening and headed outside to the parking lot to lean against my truck and talk for a bit. While we were talking, I noticed a car sitting parked near the edge of the lot with its headlights turned on, just idling. It felt a bit strange because there were only 4 other people left in the gym at that point, and they had all arrived together in one large truck. But we just shrugged it off and I drove home. About 10 minutes after I got back to my house, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Colton. He asked me if I remembered that weird girl in the red hoodie from the gym. I texted back saying, yeah, of course I did. He then asked what if that girl was actually Addie. When I read that, my stomach completely dropped. Colton told me that Addie had been acting completely crazy ever since the breakup and was desperately trying to find a way to get him back. I tried to reassure him, telling him there was no way that was her. It was probably just some random, socially awkward girl who had a weird workout routine. Eventually, we both managed to convince ourselves that it was not her, and we decided to just go to bed. Around 11:30 that night, I was lying in bed when I suddenly heard a distinct knocking sound coming from my brother's bedroom window. I got up to check, but I did not see anyone outside in the dark. A few minutes later, I heard the exact same knocking sound, but this time it was on my own bedroom window. Again, when I looked out, the yard was empty. Then suddenly, there was an incredibly loud, aggressive knocking at my front door. It sounded like someone was throwing their entire body weight against it. The front doorknob started shaking and rattling violently. It was not the sound of someone casually checking to see if the door was unlocked. It was the sound of someone actively trying to force their way inside my house. Right after the rattling stopped, I heard a girl laughing outside. It was not a normal, playful laugh. It was a loud, hysterical, unstable laugh. Every few seconds, she would stop, and then she would start laughing maniacally all over again, like she was thoroughly enjoying herself. I felt physically sick with fear. Just then, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message from a completely random, unknown phone number. The message told me that I needed to leave Colton alone. It said that I was the one who had convinced him to break up with her, and that now I was going to have to pay the consequences for what I did. I knew instantly, without a doubt, that it was Addie. A second later, another text message came through from the same number. It was a picture. The photo showed a hand holding a large, sharp knife. That was the exact moment when the situation became terrifyingly real. She was not just an angry ex-girlfriend. She was actively standing outside of my house, in the dark, carrying a lethal weapon. I immediately sent a frantic text to my dad, who thankfully was still awake in his room. He called the police right away. The hysterical laughter outside finally stopped, after a few minutes, but I was far too terrified to move from my spot or look out the window again. When the police officers finally arrived at my house with their lights flashing, they searched the property and found Addie sitting quietly in the grass near the side of the house, almost like she was just patiently waiting for me to come out. They arrested her right there on the spot. She immediately admitted everything to the officers. They came up to the door and asked me if I wanted to press criminal charges against her, and I told them yes, absolutely. I called Colton right after they took her away and told him everything that had just happened. He was incredibly shocked, and he was just so glad that I was okay. The only detail about that entire night that still absolutely bothers me to this day is how she managed to get my home address in the first place. I had never once given it to her. Colton swore to me up and down that he had never given it to her either. That part of the story still keeps me up at night, because if she was able to find out where I lived once, she could easily find it out again. I am just incredibly glad that the police arrived when they did. I am 25 years old, and for a few years I had been going to the exact same LA fitness location in my town. I usually went there right after I got off work, around 6 o'clock in the evening. When you go to the same gym at the exact same time every day, you naturally start to recognize the regular members, even if you have never actually spoken a word to any of them. About 6 months ago, I started noticing a new guy around the gym whom I had never seen before. The very first time I really took notice of him was during one of my heavy leg workouts. I was in the middle of doing a set of squats. When I finished the set, I looked up at the large mirror mounted on the wall directly in front of me. In the reflection, I saw him sitting on a chest press machine located directly behind me. He was not actually using the machine. He was just sitting there, leaning far forward with his elbows resting on his knees, staring straight ahead. When I started my next set of squats and looked up at the mirror again, he was still sitting in the exact same frozen position, but now he was staring directly in my direction. The moment our eyes met in the reflection of the glass, he quickly jerked his head and looked away. The next time I saw him was just a couple of days later. I was working on my shoulder presses when I noticed him sitting on a lat pull-down machine all the way across the gym floor. Once again, he was not actually using the equipment. The heavy weight stack on the machine was not moving at all, and it looked like he had been sitting there the entire time I had been doing my exercises. Every single time I casually glanced over in his direction, I caught him staring intently at me right before he would quickly turn his head away to avoid my gaze. After that day, I began to notice him almost every single time I went to the gym. The strangest and most unsettling part about the whole thing was that I never actually saw him do a real workout. He would simply sit on various machines or weight benches, but he would never actually lift any weights or do any reps. One night, I was doing squats again when I caught him in the mirror. He was standing a few feet behind me, holding his cell phone up high in front of his chest. The phone was angled directly towards me. For a split second, it looked exactly like he was actively recording a video of me. The very moment I stopped my set, turned around, and stared directly at him, he quickly lowered his phone and looked down at the ground. That was the moment when I started to feel genuinely uncomfortable and unsafe. Over the course of the next week, I kept seeing him everywhere. Sometimes he would be sitting on a bench near the free weights, and other times he would be on a machine on the far side of the room. But no matter where I went in the gym, he always seemed to position himself so that he had a completely clear, unobstructed view of me. One evening, I walked over to the water fountain to refill my bottle. As I turned the corner of the wall near the fountain, he was suddenly standing right there, only a few feet away from me. It startled me badly, because I had never been that physically close to him before. He immediately looked down at the floor the second he realized I had noticed him, and he quietly brushed past me without saying a word. After that encounter, I decided that I had to change my gym routine. Instead of going at 6 in the evening when it was busy, I started going around 9 o'clock at night. The gym is always a lot quieter at that time, and I figured that if he had a normal work schedule, he probably would not be there that late. The very first night I tried my new schedule, I walked in and scanned the entire room immediately. To my immense relief, he was not there. The same thing happened for the next few nights. I truly thought that I had successfully solved the problem. But then, during the weekend, my friends and I decided to go out to a popular bar downtown. The place was incredibly crowded and loud, just like most bars on a Saturday night. And there he was. I turned around while my friends and I were standing near the back of the room, and I saw the guy sitting completely alone at a small table near the wall. It took my brain a second to fully process that it was the exact same guy from the gym. He was wearing a dark jacket and had a black baseball hat pulled down very low over his face. When I looked over, he was staring directly at me. The absolute second he realized that I had seen him, he quickly looked down at his drink. Over the course of the next 20 minutes, I caught him staring at me several more times. Each time I caught him, he would quickly look away. Eventually, the anxiety became too much, and I leaned over to my friends and told them that I wanted to go somewhere else. We left the bar and walked a few blocks down the street to a different place. I did not see him again for the rest of that night, but the entire situation stayed heavy on my mind. The most terrifying moment of this entire ordeal happened about 2 weeks later. There is a beautiful nature preserve located quite close to my house that has a very long, winding dirt trail. I sometimes go there to run during the day, when the weather is nice. It was a very cloudy gray afternoon when I started my run on the dirt path that leads deep into the woods of the preserve. About 10 minutes into my run, I noticed someone jogging along the path behind me. At first I did not think anything of it because it is a public trail. But after a minute or two, I realized that the physical distance between us was not changing at all. He was staying the exact same distance behind me, matching my pace perfectly. I decided to slightly increase my running speed, and within seconds I heard his footsteps on the dirt speed up as well. I sped up even more, and he immediately did the exact same thing. When I briefly glanced back over my shoulder, I saw a man wearing a hat with his head held down, jogging right behind me. His physical build looked identical to the guy from the gym. That was the moment when the adrenaline kicked in. I knew that there was a small, narrow dirt exit path up ahead that led directly to a nearby residential street. If you took a sharp left, you could reach it quickly. I started running as fast as I possibly could, almost sprinting down the path. I could hear his footsteps getting louder and closer behind me. When I finally turned onto the narrow exit path leading up to the street, I heard him break into a full, aggressive sprint behind me. I ran with absolutely everything I had. The moment I burst out of the trees onto the residential street, I started screaming for help at the top of my lungs. A man who happened to be standing in his driveway across the road immediately looked over at me. The very second the guy chasing me saw that there was another person there watching, he stopped dead in his tracks at the edge of the tree line. I turned around and saw him hesitate for a split second before he quickly turned around and ran back into the deep woods. The man from the driveway rushed over to check on me while I leaned over, desperately trying to catch my breath. By the time I felt safe enough to look back towards the trail, the guy was completely gone. I never saw him at that gym ever again after that day. A few weeks later, I went in, officially canceled my gym membership, and joined a different gym all the way across town. This entire experience definitely made me a whole lot more paranoid in public settings, and it completely changed the way I pay attention to who is watching me. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments, and remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.